I had actually, it's an old case I had taken
Okay.
in 2019. So I'll present like that history taken at that point of time,
Sure,
sir.
sure, no
Yes.
problem.
So, my patient, 59-year-old male, Mr. X, resident of Secunderabad, educated till 8th standard. He is a retired ESIL employee. History given by self. He is a known case of chronic kidney disease on maintenance hemodialysis since 10 years. He came for his regular hemodialysis session and he complains of generalized pruritus of 8-month duration. It is insidious onset and gradually progressive. I would like to start my history from 11 years back in 2008 when the patient had first presented. That time he
Okay.
presented with low-grade fever, which was low to moderate grade fever, which was 2 weeks duration. It was intermittent, not associated with any chills, no cough, pain, abdomen, vomiting, no history of dysuria, hematuria, decreased urine or lower limb swelling, no rash, joint pain, alternative drug intake or NSAID abuse. On direct questioning, he gave history of nocturia since last 6 months. He was evaluated at that point of time and he was told that he has high BP, the value of which he doesn't remember. His creatinine was also elevated at that point of time, which was within the range 4 to 5. His urine test was done and he was told that it is abnormal, but he doesn't remember if any protein quantification or anything was done. His ultrasound done at that point, he was told that he has bilateral small kidneys. He was treated with IV antibiotics for 7 to 10 days for his fever, and he was discharged with the advice to follow up with a nephrologist in view of his chronic chronic condition. At this point of the discharge, his creatinine remained around 4. Urine output was around 1 to 1.2 liters per day. He was put on one antihypertensive medication and advised for low salt intake. In the next 1 year, he followed up with a general physician actually, where his creatinine kept on increasing. In 2009, he was admitted at our hospital with complaints of on and off fever of 2 weeks duration, associated with nausea, vomiting, and decreased appetite. There was also a history of bilateral lower limb swelling and decrease in urine output to around 400 to 500 ml per day. However, there was no history of any shortness of breath or altered sensorium. Creatinine done at this point of time was around 9. His BP was high. He was treated with antibiotics. Along with that, he was initiated on hemodialysis through right IJV hemodialysis HD catheter, and he was advised to continue a maintenance hemodialysis of three times per week. In this admission only, his left forearm AV fistula was created for him. He continued 3 weeks, thrice a week dialysis. However, after 3 weeks of initiation, he had fever during dialysis. His IJV was removed, and till the AV fistula maturation, his HD was carried on through left femoral catheter. During this time, he was also vaccinated with hepatitis B. He was also started on iron, EPO, calcium supplements. He had 2 antihypertensive drugs. His urine output was around 300 to 400 ml per day with intradialytic weight gain of 1.2 kgs. There was no history of any intra or dialytic hypo or hypertension during this time. He followed up for a year. After 1 year, he became non-compliant with his hemodialysis schedule. He used to take it only 2 times a week. During this whole year, 2010, 2 to 3 times he had ICU admissions with complaints of sudden shortness of breath, bilateral lower limb swelling, and high BP. He was put in ICU with intubation and mechanical ventilator support, and he was treated with IV antihypertensives. At this time, he also, on direct questioning, he says there was cardiac evaluation done, but he was never advised any angiography, and he doesn't remember any of the reports of the time. He was discharged with 3, he used to get discharged, he was on 3 oral antihypertensive drugs in between the admissions, the name of which he doesn't remember. He was advised for strict dietary and hemodialysis compliance. However, he became compliant after 3rd admission, and he continued with thrice a week schedule.
Okay.
In 2012, sir, there was one episode of generalized tonic-clonic movements of all four limbs with uprolling of eyeballs and frothing at mouth. When he was admitted, he was told that he had very high BP. He was treated with IV antihypertensives and anti-epileptics. At this point of time, MRI brain was done, which he was told is normal. However, at the time of admission, he was told that his left forearm AV fistula has failed and right arm AV fistula was created. The intermediate period for the AV fistula maturation, HD was carried out through right IGV catheter.
Okay.
At the time of discharge, he was put on 4 antihypertensive medications. His urine output, residual urine output, had become nil at that point, and his interdialytic weight gain was around 3 to 3.5 kgs. And he also gives history that intradialytic hypertension used to be there, and he used to take one extra tablet during the hemodialysis, which he remembers the name to be clonidine.
Okay.
So at this point of time, he was advised alternate day hemodialysis, which was continued for almost two months. And after that, he says his BP was little bit controlled, and he was back to thrice a week schedule. Again in 2015, there was second episode of seizure with again with high BP, and this time he had a failure of right arm AV fistula, and left arm AV fistula was created with intermediate period dialysis was carried out through right IGV. MRI brain was also repeated.
This time, excuse me, which fistula was created now?
Left arm, sir. Left arm.
Okay, fine.
Sir, MRI brain was also repeated at this point of time, but he says it was within normal limits. He was put on 2 anti-epileptic drugs at this time, and 5 BP tablets were there. He remembers the name, the same he is continuing at present. Nifedipine, carvedilol, clonidine, prazosin, and hydralazine.
Okay.
Also, his hemodialysis schedule was changed to 4 times a week, alternate with 3 times a week. He has been compliant with the same schedule since then. His dry weight presently remains around 59 to 60 kgs with interdialytic weight gain of 2 to 2.5 kgs. He still complains of intradialytic hypertension. He says systolic BP is around 150 at the time of his arrival. It increases to 180 or 190 during the dialysis, for which he uses 1 or 2 tablets of clonidine in between. And at the time of discharge, his BP remains around 160. Systolic BP remains around 160 by 70, 160 or 170. Like he denies missing any antihypertensive doses before coming to dialysis. He gives history that there is no history of any frequent alarms, and he is able to complete full 4 hours hemodialysis session. He is being continuing dialysis in the same center on the negative side of the HT unit with a dialysis vintage of 10 years, and during this whole time there has been no history of any blood transfusions.
Right. So is he on erythropoietin?
Yes, sir. He is on iron and erythropoietin supplements, sir.
Okay.
Since November 2018, he has been complaining of, he started with complaining bilateral lower limb pruritic sensation, which used to increase at night and used to disturb his sleep. He also had scratch marks on his leg, which got infected, for which he came for medical, we sought medical attention. He was given topical application and oral antihistaminics were given. With this, he says there was some 30 to 40% symptomatic relief in his symptoms. However, complete relief was not there, and in the next 1 month, it progressed to generalized pruritus involving his back as well as upper limbs. Despite continuation of oral antihistaminics. So he was advised phototherapy, which he took for 2 weeks. With this, he says there was almost 50 to 60% relief in his symptoms. In the next 2 months, however, his pruritic symptoms worsened and he developed patchy lesions in both upper limb, lower limb, as well as groin area. He showed to a dermatologist where he was told he has some fungal infection and 6 weeks of antifungals were given to him. With this, the patches reduced, however, pruritus continued. So second session of phototherapy was given to him, which he took for 4 weeks. Along with that, he was also put on gabapentin tablet, 300 mg, which he used to take 3 times per week post hemodialysis. Still, there was, after 1 month, there was no resolution of symptoms, and he also developed a dry cough. This cough was not associated with any weight loss, fever, or constitutional symptoms. For this cough, he was evaluated with blood tests, chest x-ray, and CT chest. But he remembers the only abnormality was he was told that there is increased eosinophils in his blood.
Okay.
He also gives history that during this time, a bone marrow study was also done, and he was told it is normal. His antihistaminics, they changed, and he was given some antibiotics of 2 weeks duration. With this, his cough resolved, but and blood eosinophils also came down, but his pruritus continued. During this 8-month period, 8 months, he remembers on direct questioning, he gives history that he was tested for calcium, phosphorus, PTH, and vitamin D3 2 times. First time, his phosphate binders were increased to 3 times per day, but there were no changes made in the second time. Also, he remembers his monthly creatinine was done, which remained around 8 to 9 milligrams per deciliter. Because of failure of these multiple therapy for pruritus, he was put on one costly medication, which 50 mg tablet he took. Half tablet he took for 1 day only. He had giddiness and drowsiness and discontinued that. He was also given, he was also advised for special costly dialysis, which he has to take once a week along with normal thrice a week dialysis. So 2 such sessions he has completed, and he says there is almost 50% relief in his symptoms. Presently, he has come for his regular hemodialysis session.
Okay. Does he have any other details about this costly dialysis?
No, sir. Only the cost he told. It was double the cost of his normal dialysis.
No problem. No problem. Go ahead.
There is a past history. There is no history of diabetes, tuberculosis, bronchial asthma, or any surgery. He's married. He has 2 children. No history of any renal illness in the family. His appetite is normal. Bowel habits are normal. No smoking or alcohol intake. Presently, he is taking 5 antihypertensive drugs, 2 anti-epileptics, EPO, iron, antihistaminic, calcium supplement, and phosphate binder cyst.
Okay.
So that's the history.
Yeah.
Sir.
So can you summarize? There are 2 ways you can summarize this case for us, or you can give us a problem list at the end of the summary and your diagnosis, or diagnosis and your problem list.
Sir, I'll summarize.
Yeah.
59-year-old male who was diagnosed as CKD in 2008 has been on hemodialysis since 2009 with a dialysis vintage of 10 years.
Right.
He has multiple episodes of hypertensive emergency presenting as flash pulmonary edema and seizure, has refractory hypertension, has history of multiple access failure in the past with present access being left arm AV fistula. Presently, his complaint is generalized pruritus, which is refractory to medical management and has been put on a trial of special dialysis, likely hemodiafiltration.
Right. So, yeah. So when I said a problem list, you actually have listed the problems. He has 2 access failures. He has refractory uremic pruritus. He has uncontrolled hypertension with complications, that is seizures, flash pulmonary edema, etc. So that's what I mean by a problem list. Right. Let's go over them in detail then. And at this point of time, maybe I'll direct the questions to you, and then if necessary, somebody else wants to add or correct us, they can. So good case summary overall. Maybe I would only have dropped one thing when you told us that this man followed up with a general physician
Yes,
and
sir.
then came to you with a creatinine of 9.
9.
It seems
Yes.
to put it that the general physician didn't do a good job, something I would avoid when talking
Oh,
about the case.
yes.
Why do you think, yeah, why do you think this man progressed from a creatinine of 4 to a creatinine of 9 within 1 year?
Um, Sir, progression could be because his one is hypertension itself. If it is not controlled well,
Right.
dietary, then dietary, sir, compliance or advice which are like salt intake, low protein intake, those
Okay.
things.
When you say when you say low protein intake, what level of protein intake will retard the progression of CKD?
Sir, it is advised zero point 0.6 to zero point 0.8 milligram, grams per kg per day as the daily protein intake has been advised.
Yeah.
However, if we reduce the protein intake, that is advised, but mostly the compliance is not that much with the patients.
So what do you think patients do?
Uh,
When you say we advise
yes, sir.
them 0.6 gram per kilogram, and they are and patients are usually not compliant, so what do you assume that they are taking, or are you aware of any studies which have told us what patients are doing?
No, sir.
No. Right. So there is a fairly old study. I think it's published in JAPI in 2000. Dr. Bharat Shah's group from Hinduja Hospital had at that time had done a study in which they showed that the average intake of Indian CKD patients was around zero point 0.6 to 0.65. And even those patients, it didn't differ much significantly whether the patients were vegetarians or non-vegetarians. It was around the same amount. So what we are looking at is that this is the level of protein which does not put more of a load on the kidney and at the same time prevents malnutrition. And that is what he found in that study was that trying to restrict protein further in Indian patients would actually lead to malnutrition. So with this recommendation of zero point 0.6 to zero point 0.8, most Indians take most Indian diets, the average Indian diet, especially vegetarian, is about zero point 0.6 anyway. So we cannot really look at a protein restriction in our patients with a point of view of retarding CKD. What we are aiming at is really trying to maintain their nutrition adequate. And if you really wanted to retard the progression of CKD, then what did MDRD and those studies do?
Sir, use of ACE inhibitor or ARB for
No, MDRD is not, they lose the MDRD is modification of diet in renal
diet.
disease.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So their ACE inhibitor bit was not so much a modification. What was the diet modification that was aimed at for retarding progress? Or for that matter, the subsequent studies which have tried to modify diet, what sort of protein intake did they look at?
Sir, the low protein, very low protein,
Yes.
and normal protein.
So what is very low protein?
Um, Sir, point 4 to 0.5, 0.3 to 0.5, sir.
0.3. It's around 0.3, and that is where they say that the supplementation with keto acids, when you can
Keto analogs, yes, sir.
keto analogs, when you can restrict the protein intake down to 0.3 grams per kilogram. So how much of keto analog should you give in that situation?
Sir, ideally we give one tablet for every 5 kg weight,
Yes,
sir.
yes.
But uh, sir, there is one study by Dr. Nayak,
Yes.
sir. In that, he has compared very low with low protein. So,
Yeah.
uh, sir, exact study.
Okay. So then don't get into a study if you haven't. Go by the standard is zero point 0.3 along with keto analogs
No.
to supplement. Right. So that is as far as the diet is concerned. I don't think non-compliance with protein in an Indian patient is often responsible for rapid progression of CKD. So I would go with what you said about maybe salt non-compliance, uncontrolled hypertension. What else could have happened in this period?
Sir, the disease progression, sir, the type of native kidney
So
disease that
yeah,
progress.
what do you think it would be at this stage that would progress within 1 year from a creatinine of 4 to a creatinine of 9?
Sir, FSGS can progress like this,
Yeah,
or
but
even
y-
Cricentric IgA can
yeah,
present,
your
can
history,
progress.
does your history suggest either of these? You
Uh,
gave me a history of nocturia, small
yes, sir.
kidneys on ultrasound, and nothing much about proteinuria at that stage. So I'm not very likely to consider FSGS high up. This looks more like a tubulointerstitial disease or a vascular disease at this point of time.
Sir,
So if this man would have been about what?
50
40,
years, 50 years at
50
the
years
day.
at
Yes,
the
sir.
time. So yes, he could be. So what I would have thought of is if he had a chronic tubular interstitial, I would have gone into the depth of whether this man was taking NSAIDs at that stage and whether he perhaps did take NSAIDs after that, and that lost him his GSFR faster. But this was all pre-dialysis, and then he went on to dialysis. Now when he went on to dialysis, there is one feature that comes out through the history, which I would go into discussion, that on two occasions he had severe hypertension and he lost his AV fistula. So,
Yes.
what do you think is responsible for the loss of an AV fistula in this situation?
Sir, generally AV fistula is lost with hypotension
Exactly,
episodes, but
exactly.
with Caesar, I was thinking arm fistula could have been affected because of the tonic-clonic movement, but I am not able to explain the radiocephalic
Yeah, because both the
fistula, which
fistulas lost were radiocephalic AV fistula. So I'm also not, that's not coming out. I mean, I'm not able to give an explanation of why somebody who was actually hypertensive lost a radiocephalic AV fistula during this episode, unless in the attempts to treat him at some stage, either a blood pressure cuff was wound on the fistula arm in emergency or something like that, which is beyond the purview of our discussion. So, what is the normal uh, reason for loss of an AV fistula?
Sir, AV fistula could be, sir, primary failure or could be secondary failure, sir.
Right.
Primary failure could be because of thrombosis or non maturation of the vessel, sir. Whereas,
Non-maturation of what?
sir, the vein, the
Okay.
arterialization of the vein,
And
if it does,
why would that happen?
if already, sir, atherosclerotic vessels, artery is atherosclerotic, so the flow
Okay.
won't
One.
be.
So
Yes,
an
sir.
inflow problem with the artery. How would you on or we'll okay, we'll discuss that when we come to examination. So one is an atherosclerotic artery. Two,
Um, so the surgical technique,
that would tell you a surgical technique, that's a failure of the fistula on table or immediately after. It won't be a cause of non-maturation.
sir. Presence of accessory vessels, sir.
Okay, yes, good. Yes,
Retrace.
that would be. Why do you think an accessory vessel will develop more than the basic vein of an AV fistula? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Uh,
Anybody? Why does an accessory vein develop rather than the main vein of an AV fistula?
so the blood vessel, the blood would get distributed in these accessories.
Yeah, but why should the accessory develop preferentially?
Might be because of their outflow stenosis.
Yes, that's the possible reason. The accessory veins are often veins which are running off deeper and which have therefore not been at any time cannulated in the past. Whereas the
Oh,
main fistula vein is usually because we want to use a superficial vein, so we choose the
sir.
cephalic vein. And that cephalic vein, if it has been used either for blood draws or for intracath access in the past, that vein may already have a stenosis. In such a situation, the native fistula will tend to develop an accessory vein.
Sir.
Right. Okay. So that's as far as. Is anyone aware of the new classification? There's last month the KDOKI has come out with a 160-page document on vascular access. So how have they classified complications of vascular access now? They have divided them into just 3. Thrombotic, non-thrombotic, and infectious complications. Okay, right.
Yes.
So what is the commonest cause of thrombosis of an AV fistula? Ultimately, it's always a loss is mostly because of a thrombus. So what is the commonest cause of thrombosis?
So basically, thrombus will form if there is stasis of flow, sir. So
Yes.
if the initial flow, if they say is less than 200 ml, then
Okay, and so what is the normal flow in a radiocephalic AV fistula?
so 600 to
600. So
1000.
why would it be less than 200?
Sir, if any clot or hematoma post surgery develops at that point.
No, not really. See, if you look at the life of or the
Hypotension, sir. Hypotension if during.
yeah, hypotension, of course, but then that would really be a problem that is developing because of a complication that should not be there. But commonly, what happens? Why do fistulas which start off well, which have good flow, incidentally, there are again they have given you two terminologies for blood flow. What flow are what are the two blood flows associated with a vascular axis in the latest KDOQI? And what is the difference between the two? What is intra-axis flow and what is pump flow? Anybody?
So
Unmute yourself. Yeah.
Intra-axis flow is around 800 to 1 liter per minute
In a radiocephalic?
in a brachiocephalic fistula.
Okay, I'm talking about a radiocephalic at the moment.
600 to 800 ml per.
It's about 600, which is what Dr. Rashmi said as well. And what is pump flow and why are they different?
So pump flow is
Flow is around 300.
300 to 400 flow in with the machine roller pump which makes.
So it's limited to 300 to 400. Why?
Yes.
Why is it limited to 300 to 400 if your access is able to give you 600?
Because of the tubings, because of the other resistances which eventually
Which is the site which limits the flow?
needles.
Arterial
Needles.
Of course, it's the needle. So depending on what size needle you are using, that is what is going to limit your pump flow. And irrespective of what the access flow may be, the needle is the limiting point for your pump flow. So even if you have a brachiocephalic AV fistula, as somebody said, which may have a flow of 1 liter, if you use a 17 gauge needle, what flow will you get?
200 to 200.
200.
250.
If you use a 16,
350.
350. And if you use a 15,
450.
500.
500.
500 or even more. So that is what is meant by the limitation of the pump flow. The pump flow is determined by what is the maximum speed you can set on your pump, the size of your tubings, and most of all, the limiting factor is the size of the needle. The bigger the needle you choose, the more will be your pump flow, provided your access flow is that much. Now, supposing you set a higher pump flow on your than what your access is delivering. Like Dr. Rashmi said, that if the access flow is gone down to 200, and I don't know why this 200, there is a reason, of course there's a reason. This 200 is considered important. Why?
Because if we use more than that, there'll be recirculation. Yeah,
Yes,
and
that of course. But why are you worried about 200? Why not if I've got a patient who weighs about 40 kg and I'm able to do dialysis with 150 flow, what's wrong?
So future chances
Sir,
of
dialysis. Sir, adequacy of dialysis will
Yeah, so I'll increase my length of my duration,
Sure.
and I'll use 150 flow, and I'll increase my dialysate flow to 800.
8.
I'll get my KT by V, which is my target. What's wrong?
chances of
impending thrombosis.
thrombosis.
Chances of
fistula thrombosis.
Future
Why?
thrombosis. Future
Why? Why?
Sluggish blood flow.
Sluggish
Blood
flow will increase
stasis.
and blood stasis.
Yeah, which comes back to the first question we were asking. Why is that flow sluggish?
Inflow stenosis.
Yes.
Inflow stenosis.
Yes.
No, not inflow. Here it could even be outflow. There is basically a stenosis at some point in the fistula, and this fistula, which started off by having a flow of 600, when it drops down to around 200, that is sort of the critical flow below which a fistula is at a high risk. It's already stenosed, and it is therefore at a high risk for thrombosis. The commonest cause of fistula thrombosis is an unrecognized stenosis, and it is for this reason that all the tools which are available, and if you go into that document, they have told you that there are 3 things which are available: monitoring, surveillance, and diagnostic testing.
Diagnostic.
What is the difference between monitoring and surveillance?
Sir, surveillance we do at a pre-specified time,
But-
whether there is a dysfunction or not, we do surveillance. But monitoring is done with a clinical sign and symptom whenever we feel there is any dysfunction or any clinical problem.
I'm afraid there are 2 people talking. One at a time, please. Yeah. Go ahead, Dr. Rashmi.
Sir, one is what we do like every time the patient comes to dialysis, we have to at that point assess the axis.
Right.
And when we do it at a particular time specified this thing, then it is monitoring. Like if we have some problem and then we do it.
Then it's monitoring.
Yes, sir.
And what is and surveillance is what you do
Every
time.
patient, every patient.
No. Monitoring is clinical examination. Surveillance relies on on some specific testing methods, usually non-invasive. That is, you might be looking at static venous pressures. You may be looking at ultrasound derived flow. You may be looking at a dilutional method of measuring flow. You may be measuring recirculation. You may be measuring your KT/V. All these are surveillance tools. And plain simple inspection, palpation, auscultation is monitoring. And in addition to that, there is one test which has been included as monitoring and not as surveillance. Anybody? Kedoki? Dynamic venous pressure trends. So dynamic venous pressure by itself is a good system of monitoring, especially in AV grafts. It's less helpful in an AV fistula unless, of course, it is positive. Why is that? That dynamic venous pressures are not useful in an AV fistula as compared to an AV graft. Some of you have told me the answer in the maybe without knowing it in part of this discussion. How and when do you measure a dynamic venous pressure?
It's a machine that
The
measures
machine,
pressure.
yeah.
Venous.
One person.
So
Yeah,
when we do it when dialysis is ongoing, that pressure is dynamic venous pressure monitoring.
Which pressure?
Sir, the post pump pressure, sir.
Okay. So where is the post pump pressure measured in your dialysis circuit? I'm afraid
sir,
none of us can see each other, so we can't draw diagrams, but go ahead.
Sir, this is once the blood comes back from the dialyzer, that goes before the air detector, sir. That before that air
So
detector
there
bulb
is-
is there. Above that there is a
It's okay. It's called the venous bubble chamber, not a bulb. So is that the point of highest pressure in the circuit? Where is the pressure highest in the circuit?
Vein needle.
Venous needle? No. No. Okay, Ishan, go ahead. Where is the pressure highest in the circuit? Where is the pressure?
Pre-pumps.
Pre-pump is the high.
Negative. Sir,
Pre-pump is a
neg-
negative. It's a negative
Negative.
pressure. Quite
both
right.
Venous side only positive.
Yeah. So immediately,
filter-
Just post pump, but tubing is the highest.
yes,
The
immediately post pump is the highest pressure, and then it progressively decreases, and the lowest positive pressure is actually at the point where the venous needle enters the fistula again. So the pressure that you measure in the venous bubble chamber is somewhat intermediate between the lowest and the highest pressures. See, which is the point of maximum resistance in a dialysis circuit?
So where arterial needles, sir,
No,
where it is being
no. You have. Is that the point of maximum resistance? It's not. See, you look at it this way. You know Ohm's law, that
Yeah.
current is equal to voltage upon resistance. In other
Yes, sir.
words, what happens is there is a driving force in an electrical circuit, which is voltage, and there is a resistance which is offered to the passage of current. Now you
Yes,
apply the same thing to a mechanical circuit like our dialysis blood circuit. Your driving force is your blood pump.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So the driving force is the pressure generated by the blood pump. The resistance is offered at various points in the circuit due to various things, and the blood flow is the equivalent of the current. So your pump is providing the driving force and the circuit is offering some resistance to the blood flow. So where is the point of maximum resistance?
At the dialyzer, before
Dialyzer.
entering the dialyzer.
Absolutely, it's the dialyzer. And the reason for that is that the finest, you know that resistance is directly proportional to length and inversely proportional to diameter.
Diameter.
Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah. So here you have a surface or area. So the areas which have the smallest the
Diameter.
diameter
Lumen.
are the hollow fibers.
Yes, sir.
So they are what is the normal diameter of a single hollow fiber?
So 200
Microns.
meter.
Exactly. And no other point in the circuit can be measured in terms of micrometer. So obviously it is the dialyzer that offers the maximum resistance. So that is the point in the circuit at which the resistance is highest, and it therefore, because the resistance is highest, the pressure drop will be maximum across the dialyzer. So immediately post pump your pressure is very high, but your dialyzer produces a large pressure drop across it, and at the venous bubble chamber therefore the pressure is much lower, and then there is a little further drop as it goes from the venous bubble chamber to the venous needle, which is much less. So there is a maximum drop of pressure across the dialyzer, which is the blood compartment pressure. And therefore, when we talk about transmembrane pressure, if we get the time, we will go into it. Now let us go back to our patient, since we have digressed for some time onto the dialysis circuit itself and the vascular access. I would advise strongly that everybody read the new KDOKI guidelines, which are on vascular access. They are published April 2020. The lead author is Shamin Locke, and there is a whole working group, and they have made a statement at the start that there was a reason the vascular access guidelines have been revised after 14 years from 2000 to this year, and that is because there is a significant change in many points in that, including there is it starts with a list of terminology, and it would be advisable to know that the point they are making over there is that it is necessary for us all over the world to start talking the same language. So the terminology has been standardized in this KDOKI document. Now getting back to our patient, he had multiple episodes of hypertension, LVF, etc. And he had multiple admissions because of that. In 2 of them, he lost his fistula. On other occasions, he got intubated, etc. So obviously, this patient had very uncontrolled hypertension. What do you think happened to cause this patient ICU admissions, seizures, uncontrolled hypertension? And he also had this very significant problem that he was getting intradialytic hypertension, and he was taking clonidine on dialysis, and even now from your history is on 5 antihypertensives. So what is the problem that our patient has run into on dialysis?
So one is like the course of the disease. If we say it is a chronic interstitial disease,
Right.
they can have, they won't have hypertension at the beginning of the disease, but later on they can have hypertension.
Why?
And that too refractory.
Why? Why is it that they don't have it at the start, which is exactly what happened to your patient? He did well for a year, then he became non-compliant. Then even after that, even after he became compliant, he is now not doing well despite that.
Sir, it could be because of the basis of like we divide hypertension in dialysis as salt sensitive and salt resistant. So
Okay.
like this patient could be the salt resistant one, the renin mediated hypertension could be the cause for this
Why
hypertension.
do you say that? Or in other words, what I'm asking is, what is the commonest cause for the sort of thing that happened to this patient? What is the commonest cause in dialysis patients?
Um,
Why you there are arguments in favor of renin mediated hypertension, true, and we'll come to that. I'm sure you've got them since you brought that up as the first cause. But what is the commonest cause for what has happened to your patient?
Loss of residual renal function.
Absolutely.
Volume mediated.
Yeah, no, this patient, so both the things that you all have given, loss of residual renal function, this patient appears to have lost his residual renal function fairly rapidly. He probably didn't have a great deal to begin with, which brings me to what is the essential or what is the amount of residual renal function which you would like to preserve as much as possible?
it's around 400 ml, sir, 400 to 500 ml, because that is the minimum amount of fluid.
Residual renal function, what you're talking about is urine output.
Sir,
Now looking
more
at
than
it,
2 ml per minute, sir.
yes, 2 ml per minute is considered as a significant residual renal function. What is the evidence for this?
Sir, it was mentioned in KDOKI old guidelines at 2000.
Why? Yeah, but why? The KDOKI never makes a statement which is not based on evidence. Even if there is evidence, they tell you what is the level of evidence. And if it's not based on evidence, then they tell you clearly this is an opinion. So when they said 2 ml per minute and they made, as you said, a very important recommendation based on that, which is significant for us in India, I think. And what is the evidence that this 2 ml is worth preserving?
Canusa in PD studies.
Yeah, Canusa. So what did Canusa say?
So in the post-hoc analysis of the Canusa study, the patient having residual function of more than 2 were of decreased mortality and higher survival than the less value.
So did Canusa look at 2 ml per minute, or did they look at
Sir,
for
and creatinine clearance per week they looked at, and they looked at KT by V, sir.
Yeah, and what KT by V did they
mortality
target?
with that, like.
Yeah, so what KT by
they targeted
2.1.
2.1 is correct. And then, and what do we accept today, and what is it based on?
Sir, 2.3 per week is advised, but 2.1 is accepted, sir.
Huh?
1 point.
No.
Per week. Okay, sorry. 1.7.
3.9 per week.
Yes, sir.
Wait. 1.7 for PD, and somebody said 3.9. That's you're talking about HD.
Yes.
So yes, sir.
No, so both of you are quite correct. 1.7 is what is acceptable. And where did 1.7 come from?
ADMAX.
ADMAX and Hong Kong study, sir.
Yeah. So because of this difference between Canusa and ADMAX, what was discovered was that it was not what you were achieving so much with PD, but the preservation of the residual renal function, which allowed you to get away with a much lower value of a total KT by V and measured creatinine clearance, provided the residual renal function was maintained, and that was what impacted survival rather than the absolute value of KT by V. Now, somebody said, sorry?
Yeah, no, nothing.
Yeah. Somebody said that in HD we are targeting 3.9 per week. Why this gross difference between PD where you're looking at 1.7 and HD where you want to go to 3.9?
So because PD is a continuous process, that's why we target a low KT by V.
So it's continuous and this is not.
Intermittent.
Yeah, it's intermittent. So what? Why should I?
So it's a seesaw thing which will happen, sir, with the toxins. It will increase and it will.
So is there any way that I can equalize or I can equalize or normalize the clearances of PD and HD?
Yes, so standard KT by V.
Standardized KT by V. Standard KT by V.
One is the standard KT by V. What else?
EKRU.
Yeah, EKRU. So what is EKRU? Somebody said EKRU. What is EKRU?
Sir,
Residual urea clearance.
urea.
Equivalent urea clearance.
Equilibrated.
Okay, so equilibrated urea clearance, that's fine, that's absolutely fine. But I'm not going to ask you the mathematical formula by which this is done, but what are you doing when you calculate an equivalent urea clearance?
Sir, we are taking an average of the pre-dialysis urea amongst the 3 sessions in hemodialysis.
Right.
And sir, that's why we are getting the standard.
Are we
Sir, we target urea clearance to 10 ml per minute.
Are we taking an average of the 3 sessions that's equivalent to, say, what you're taking of 3.9? And how is it like, how does it make a difference? You got 1.2 in one session, 1.3 in one session, and 1.4 in the other. So the average is 1.3. That's not equivalent urea clearance.
Sir, it is
generation divided by concentration.
Sorry?
Divided by
Sir, it is generation.
Yeah. So essentially, when what you're doing with calculating either a standard KT by V or an equivalent urea clearance, you are taking into account the fact that you have a very high efficiency process which is running intermittently for 4 hours at a time, and then you have a long period in which there is virtually no urea clearance or very small urea clearances to the tune of 1 and 2 ml per minute. During that period of time, when the dialytic process is not going on, you have to downsize what the highly efficient process that happened during those 4 hours to take into account the period when urea generation is going on but no urea removal is occurring. And therefore you can when you downsize the values of the what is your normal dialytic urea clearance? Say you are doing a hemodialysis, what is the clearance of urea?
200 ml per minute.
200. How do you make that out? So we are running a dialysis. My blood flow is 300. My dialysate flow is 500.
500.
What is my urea clearance?
So urea reduction ratio will be around 63.
No, that's a urea reduction ratio
Reduction
that I'm
ratio.
targeting.
Yes, sir.
Now I'm running my dialysis, or you take your patient, he's getting a good dialysis with a blood flow of 300 and a dialysate flow of 500. What is his urea clearance and what does it depend? Ultimately, the KT by V that you're talking about is,
Yes.
what is KT by V? K is clearance, T is time.
Time of dialysis. V
And
is
V
the
is
volume
volume
of
of
the distribution. Yes.
We are talking about K. T is fixed by you as the treating doctor, 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever you want. V is the patient's volume of distribution, which is fixed again by his body size, body composition. So K is the only thing that you can change. So what does K depend on?
K naught A?
Pardon?
The efficiency of the dialyzer?
The efficiency of the dialyzer. So somebody said K naught A. What is K naught A?
Sir, K naught A is defined as the clearance of a particular solute, the maximum theoretical clearance of a solute,
Right.
which is calculated with infinite blood flow and dialysate flow, and it is expressed as ml per
Minute.
per ml per minute. Yes, sir.
What does it depend on?
Sir, it depends on the this thing. So the mass transfer area, surface area.
It depends on surface area.
Area and
Yes,
For
sir.
all practical
membrane
purposes,
characteristics.
it depends on membrane characteristics
Yes, sir.
and surface area. So if you pick a dialyzer with a surface area of 1.4, it's going to have a much higher KOA than a dialyzer which has a surface area of 1 in such a situation. So your dialyzer of 1.4 has a higher clearance. Your dialyzer of 2 meters squared has a still higher KOA. And clearance, as somebody said, is dependent on the KOA. But if I want to get a better urea clearance, I'm going to have to pick a bigger dialyzer. I'm going to use a higher blood flow, and I'm going to use a dialysate flow of how much? What should the dialysate flow be?
1.5.
So generally it is double. Yes, sir. It should be at least the blood flow should be 50% of more than 50% of the dialysate flow, sir.
More than 50%, you're quite right. So it's normally kept, the dialysate flow is kept at, anybody uses a 5008 machine?
We use
Resilience. Yes.
You use a 5008 machine. What
Yes.
is autoflow? What is the autoflow option on it?
Sir, it machine itself calculate the substitute and dialysis.
Substitute and dialyze it. You're doing hemodiafiltration?
Yes, generally we do for hemodiafiltration.
So what does the machine calculate?
So the filtration fraction or
Really?
Sir, the ratio between blood flow and dialysis flow will be like if you can accomplish like optimal.
So in the autoflow option, what you are doing is you are ensuring that you optimize the ratio of blood flow to dialysate flow. The default value set on the machine is 1.2. You can alter that, go to 1.4, 1.5, etc. Now what that means is if you connect your arterial pressure transducer, then the machine will determine the blood flow that it's obtaining. How does the machine do that? For that matter, all the Fresenius series machines display two blood flows on the machine. What are they?
So the
it displays
actual delivered.
So one is effective blood flow and
one is effective blood flow, and the other is
the
where is the effective blood flow displayed on your
on the monitor on the monitor.
It's displayed at the right bottom corner,
right side
bottom corner of the screen. And just above your blood pump is the set blood flow. So what you set is what is displayed above the blood pump, and on the bottom right hand corner of the screen the effective blood flow is displayed. What is the difference between the two of these? And have you seen a difference on the machine?
Yes, sir. So the autoflow factor, there's one 1.2.
No. Autoflow factor has nothing to do with.
Sir, effective blood flow is slightly lower than
the actual
blood flow which we said.
How is that? How does that happen? When you say slightly lower, how much lower is it? If I set 300, what sort of an effective blood flow will I get?
We will get around 290, 295 because of the resistance of the access, the tubing, and the pump segment. So
you always get 290 and 295.
No,
You're very
no,
lucky.
Sir. No, 270, 260.
Yeah, it usually gives you around 275 or so. Now, what is that effective blood flow, and how does the machine know what it is getting?
Sir,
So somebody said 290, and that means when he said 295, it means his machine is actually not measuring the effective blood flow. What the machine does is that when you connect if you don't connect the arterial pressure transducer, the machine reads arterial pressure as 0 because the transducer is zeroed at the atmospheric pressure. When you connect the arterial pressure transducer, the arterial pressure displayed in the first LED display is negative. And that is actually the pressure, the pre-pump pressure. It is being measured at the arterial bubble chamber, which you have transduced, which is pre-pump. Now, because the length of the pump segment is fixed, the diameter of the pump segment is fixed, the viscosity of blood is assumed by the machine from some factory set value. The machine is using Poisson's equation to calculate the effective blood flow. Now, Hello,
sir.
Yeah. Okay. So when the machine calculates the effective blood flow, it displays that at the right lower corner of the screen. And because the negative arterial pressure if the arterial pressure is 0, then the machine will display exactly the same value as what you have set, which is what the people who are saying 295 have seen. That the arterial pressure is not, the arterial transducer is not connected, the machine will display the same value in both points. If the arterial pressure is transduced, then the actual effective blood flow through the pump segment is what the machine displays as the effective blood flow. Now, once the machine knows the effective blood flow, if you have set it on auto flow in the case of the 5008, then if the effective blood flow is 300, the machine will multiply 300 by 1.5 if that is your auto flow factor and deliver dialysate flow at 450. If by chance, for some reason, your access is malfunctioning and it goes down to 200, your blood flow, the machine, so as not to waste dialysate at 450, will bring your dialysate flow down to 300.
Good.
So dialysate is not wasted in the presence of an ineffective blood flow. Because if you look at clearances, what happens? What if you increase your blood flow by around 100 ml per minute? How much is your clearance roughly increased by? Say you increase your blood flow from 200 to 300. What is the percentage increase in clearance? It's roughly 35%. But if you then increase your dialysate flow from 500 to 800, that's an increase in 300. What is the rough increase in percentage of your clearance?
5% to 10%.
Not more than 10%.
Yeah, about 14, 10 to 15%. So an increase in the dialysate flow is much less efficient at increasing your clearance as compared to an increase in the blood flow up to a particular value. As you know, beyond which the blood flow, the clearance plateaus with increasing blood flow, and then you have that series of line of curves which at different blood and dialysate flows. Now somebody talked about hemodiafiltration on the 5008, and I believe this patient also has been receiving some hemodiafiltration. So we will get into a discussion on hemodiafiltration here itself. So what do you think, Dr. Rashmi, is the indication for why this patient received hemodiafiltration?
Sir, one is like he has refractory pruritus.
Right.
So it could be because of the uremic toxins which are not cleared by hemodialysis.
Right.
Only the middle molecules. So
Yes.
for the clearance of middle molecules is better in hemodiafiltration. So that is the
Quite
reason
right.
why it is added to his regular schedule.
So why is the clearance better of middle molecules with hemodiafiltration?
So because it is using both the concepts of diffusion as well as convection. So
Right.
like with diffusion, the higher molecular weight will not go. So it is dependent on the diffusion is dependent on the weight of the molecule.
On
so
right.
So that won't happen. But in convection, there will be solvent drag, and along with that, the high molecular weight toxins will also be removed, sir.
Right. So when you add convection, you are removing middle molecules, is what you said, and that is what you're hoping to do. Which is the middle molecule which has best been studied, and what is it related to?
So beta 2 microglobulin, sir.
Quite right. So beta 2 microglobulin is probably the best studied middle molecule in uremia today. And the reason, so the beta 2 microglobulin is related to which condition? Or which condition?
The amyloidosis.
Dialysis related amyloidosis.
Right.
And dialysis related amyloidosis is going down today for multiple reasons. One of them is the use of
sir, ultra pure water and
yes.
Sir, of course, hemodiafiltration.
Yes, but hemodiafiltration.
High flux dialysis.
High flux dialysis. So how do you define a high flux dialyzer today in 2020?
Sir, flux has been defined by two ways, sir. One is with the KUF can be defined as the plasma water clearance. So if it is less than 8, it is low flux. If it is more than 20, it is high flux. Or we can define as beta 2 microglobulin, clearance of beta 2 microglobulin. If
Right.
it is less than 0.1, it is low, and if it is more than 0.6, it is high flux, sir.
Right. So essentially earlier it was defined in terms, flux was defined quite rightly, as you said, in terms of the ultrafiltration coefficient or the water or the plasma water clearance. So that was the earlier concept, and today high flux is determined in terms of beta 2 microglobulin clearance. So low flux, high efficiency and high flux dialyzers depending on their beta 2 low efficiency, high efficiency, and high flux dialyzers depending on their clearances of low molecular weight. Poor clearance even of low molecular weight, that's low efficiency.
Yes.
Good clearance of low molecular weight toxins like urea, high efficiency, but poor clearance of beta 2 microglobulin. And good clearance of beta 2 microglobulin also beyond 20 ml per minute is what I think has been mentioned, and that is called as high flux dialysis. Have you heard of high retention onset dialysis?
No, sir.
No. Have you heard of high cutoff dialyzers?
Yes, sir. High cutoff dialyzers are with the capacity to remove almost 50,000 kilodalton. This thing with KUF of more than 50, sir.
Okay.
Around 40-50.
So high
And
cutoff, yeah. So high cutoff dialyzers would tend to remove molecules even with a molecular weight of more than 50 kilodaltons. So what is the problem with this dialyzer?
sir, albumin loss is very significant.
Albumin
with the
losses are significant because the molecular weight of albumin is around 66,000. So some amount of albumin will be lost. So what a high retention onset dialyzer does is it removes molecules up to about 45,000, which includes the light chains, but does not remove albumin in significant quantities. So two terms are used to define the high retention onset dialysis, and the come from Gambro with the trade name is Terranova. It's just recently becoming available now in India as well. So there are two terms which are used, the sieving coefficient and the retention onset. So what is the sieving coefficient?
So it is defined in terms of beta to clearance of beta 2 microglobin and retention in terms of albumin retention.
No, I asked what is the sieving coefficient? What is the definition of sieving coefficient?
So it's the ratio of a substance in the dialysate upon the plasma.
Yes, that's quite right.
Yes, sir.
So a sieving coefficient is the ratio of the concentration in the dialysate to the concentration in plasma or blood. So the sieving coefficient should be how much for a dialyzer to be called? So the retention onset of sieving coefficient is defined as how much?
More than 0.6.
0.9. So if essentially you have if the sieving coefficient is 1, it means there is a complete clearance of a particular solute. If the sieving coefficient drops to 0.9, that has been termed as the molecular weight retention onset. And when the sieving coefficient drops to 0.1, that has been termed as the molecular weight cutoff. So if you have a dialyzer which has its molecular weight retention onset somewhere around 10,000 and its molecular weight cutoff somewhere around 45,000, then it is going to clear significantly those molecules which have molecular weights between 10,000 and 45,000, which includes lambda kappa light chains, beta 2 microglobulin, several inflammatory cytokines and others, but it is going to exclude albumin because the albumin has a higher molecular weight than 45,000, and so the concentration of albumin in the dialysate as compared to that in the blood is going to be less than 0.1 or probably even less than 0.05. So albumin is not going to be lost with a high retention onset dialyzer as opposed to a high cutoff dialyzer. So Theralite was a high cutoff dialyzer which was used in the treatment of
multiple myeloma, sir.
Multiple myeloma.
There are two trials. Sorry.
Yeah, fine. So we won't go into those two trials. Everyone can go through them, Eulite and Mylan. And yeah. So, but what we are talking, so Terranova has replaced Theralite because Theralite was associated with losses of albumin, and that problem has been taken care of with the high retention onset dialysis. You will find a few articles on what is called as expanded dialysis, and I'm not going to go into that right now. Aniket, how much time more have we got?
Sir, as such, we can go for about 15-20 more minutes.
Okay, so we'll go for 15-20 more minutes. We'll come back to what we were talking about, which is hemodiafiltration. So, Dr. Rashmi, you were quite right when you said there will be more clearance of middle molecules with hemodiafiltration. So, assuming we had to do hemodiafiltration for this patient, tell me your prescription.
Sir, we will set blood flow rate and dialysate flow rate. So blood flow will be 80 to 100 ml per minute. Dialysate rate we calculate, sir, 25 to 35 ml per minute. And
okay, but
then
so which machine are you using?
Sir, 5008S only, sir.
But that doesn't give you such low dialysate flow rates. The lowest
yes, sir, it gives
flow
in
rate
per hour, sir. It gives in, well, we have to set in per hour, sir.
No, The 5008 has dialysate flow in ml per minute. It goes from 100 to 1000 ml per minute.
Okay, sir.
Who was Ishan? Did you say you are using the 5008?
Yes, sir.
What dialysate flow rates do you set?
So we set around 500 to 800 ml per minute.
300, I think. We set
And
it around.
so
300.
and a blood flow around 300 to 400 ml per minute with convective volume of 19 to 23 liters per during 4-hour session.
Yeah. So you set your blood. So Dr. Rashmi, what you
Sir.
are talking, the blood flow rates that you are giving are what are
Yes, sir.
used in CRRT, blood and dialysis.
Okay, sir.
So
Okay.
those flow rates are not possible on our hemodialysis machines. They would be used on CRRT machines. If you keep your blood flow when you are doing a hemodiafiltration on a 5008 machine as low as 80 to 100 ml per minute, you are guaranteed to lose your circuit because you will not then be able to deliver.
Yes,
And
sir.
yeah, what
I understand. I'm telling about
yeah.
CRRT. We
Yeah,
use
what
that
you're
machine for
talking,
that only.
yeah.
Hybrid
So
500.
yeah, so when you do CRRT, you will be setting your blood flows at that low rate. What Dr. Ishan is talking about is using hemodiafiltration in chronic patients as this patient appears to be getting, and you can set your blood flow as he said at how much did you say?
So 300 to 400 ml.
Okay, so you set say you are setting 350 ml per minute. You said you set your dialysate flow at how much?
So 500 to 800 ml per minute we set.
500 to 800 ml per minute, and you set your replacement fluid at.
So at around 19 to 23 liter in
Yeah.
4
So
hours session, around 80 ml per minute.
So let's assume that it's 21 liters per 4-hour session.
4-hour session.
Or 20 liters to make calculations easier. So 20 liters, that's 5 liters per hour or around 82 ml per minute. So, yeah. So what is your filtration fraction?
So it will be blood flow upon UFR.
Blood flow upon UFR. So 350 divided by ultrafiltration rate, which is how much? That depends on the patient's interdialytic weight gain, right?
Weight gain. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So how much is that? So assuming, Dr. Rashmi, how much is it in your patient?
The 2.5 liters.
2.5 liters. So 2.5 liters in 4 hours, that's about 600 ml per hour or about 10 ml per minute. So your filtration fraction, Dr. Ishan, is 350 divided by 10, that's 35.
Yes, sir.
35.
So filtration fraction will be around less than 30.
But this one is this is coming 35.
Okay. So you have to reduce the increase the time or reduce the increase the substitute.
Does anyone have any comment to make about my calculation of the filtration?
Sir, actually we also need to include the replacement fluid in the blood flow.
Calculate. But that is the machine will automatically remove.
Even if the machine automatically removes it, the machine does not calculate the filtration fraction for you. You need to know it. So the machine will, what the machine will do is, it will add that much of ultrafiltration and do the ultrafiltration, but it does not calculate the filtration fraction. The Prismaflex machine does calculate and display filtration fraction if you go into the setting, but the A5008 does not routinely display it. Now, if you do, therefore, so as somebody said, you have your 10 ml per minute of how much?
Ultrafilter.
10 ml per minute of ultrafiltration, and you are giving replacement fluid at, we said, around 80 ml per minute.
80 ml.
So 80 plus 10. So whatever replacement fluid is being given, as someone said quite correctly, has to be also removed. So 80 plus 10, so 90 ml per minute is the ultrafiltration that the machine is doing. Your blood flow is about 350. So now what is your filtration fraction? 350 divided by 90?
90.
Yes, sir.
So around 4. Yes.
4 what?
4
actually, filtration fraction, the formula is like effective overall Q effective divided by blood flow into 1 minus hematocrit. I think the blood flow comes as a denominator.
Yeah. So whoever said that is absolutely correct. The blood flow what is filtration fraction? It is the amount of ultrafiltrate is water.
So if you do more ultrafiltration, filtration fraction increases. So as
Increases.
of
But
now, till we are discussing, it is ultra, sir. Like,
yeah, so you're absolutely right that the numerator contains the ultrafiltration and the denominator should contain the plasma water.
blood
Now,
flow.
yeah, so
Yes, sir.
plasma water. So plasma water is equal to blood flow into 1 minus hematocrit, as somebody said quite correctly.
Yes, sir.
Because yeah, so if your blood, so if you have your blood flow here of 350, then and your patient has a hematocrit, I make things simple and say his hematocrit is 30. So 1 minus 0.3 for 30%, that's 0.7. So 0.7 into 350 is the plasma water flow. Okay. So 0.7 into 350, that's the plasma water flow. That's about 250, 245. So 250. And now if your ultrafiltration is 80 plus 10, which is 90, then your filtration fraction is 90 divided by 250, which is roughly about, it's almost 40%.
4. Yes,
35%, 35 to 36%, 36%. It's about 36%. So that's too high a filtration fraction, Dr. Ishan. You're very lucky if you're managing to get this type of hemodiafiltration without losing your circuit. So 36% is far too high. It should not be more than 20 to 25% should be the filtration fraction. Now, therefore, in order to do hemodiafiltration and keep the filtration fraction low, what can you do? Anyone?
Sir,
What are
can
the
you
methods?
repeat the question?
Yeah. So we calculated just now, according to the prescription Dr. Ishan wanted to give us, that this patient has 350 ml per minute blood flow. He is getting about 21 liters of replacement fluid, which 20 liters of replacement fluid, which we calculated comes to 80 ml per minute. We are also doing 10 ml per minute of ultrafiltration to take care of his interdialytic weight gain. So we've got 90 ml per minute there. And then we said his hematocrit is about 30. So we calculated his plasma water flow as 250, and we ended up by getting a filtration fraction of 36%. So we said that's too high and we are likely to lose our circuit in such a situation. What can we do to preserve our circuit and that achieve our target?
We can dilute the blood, like we increase pre-filter flow, we can increase it so that the negative component of hematocrit will be diluted, or
Yes.
we can increase the blood flow also, sir.
Yeah. So the first thing, so which would you rather do? Would you rather do
Firstly,
pre-dilution or increase your blood flow?
If my idea is to increase the clearance, I would increase the blood flow, sir.
Right.
If my idea is not to increase the clearance and maintain hemodynamics, I would increase the pre-filter.
So if you, why would, so would your, so what is your idea? Do you want to do more clearance or you don't want to do more clearance?
If it is a maintenance hemodialysis patient, I would want to increase the clearance, or I would increase the blood flow, sir.
Somebody, Dr. Ishan said he keeps his dialysate flow at 800. So he's getting a good clearance anyway.
Replacement fluid we will increase post-filter test.
So why do you want a particular amount of convective clearance? What is the evidence for what convective clearance you should achieve if you are doing hemodiafiltration?
Sir, actually, there are 3 trials, sir. Contrast, ISHOL, and OK. So, ISHOL and OK were the trials which, the cutoff which they have taken as about 21 liters if high convective clearance has better CV, lesser CV mortality and overall survival, sir.
That's right. The overall 3-year survival was significantly better in the Spanish, the Catalonian study, which you're talking about, ISHOL and OK. So in that, they were 21 and 23 liters of convective clearance respectively. So if you want to achieve, to impact survival, and the other 2 studies, the Turkish and the contrast studies, they did not manage to show in their randomization a significant benefit of convective clearance. And the reason was that
their clearance was 19, around 17 to 19.
17,
less.
yeah. So they used much lower values. And when they analyzed the subgroup, which had got more than 21 liters, then they were able to show a survival benefit even in that. But that was a post hoc analysis, and it was not, the numbers were not good enough to draw that conclusion. So therefore, based on the Spanish study, if you do want to achieve, otherwise you are wasting resources. As this patient told you, there is one dialysis in the week at which he pays twice as much. So you wouldn't really be achieving what you were aiming to do if you did convective clearance but did not achieve what the Spanish study showed would be the minimum required in order to impact survival. You might get some additional other benefits with apart from survival, like removing beta 2 microglobulin, etc., at lower convective volumes, but that would be doing a lot of work for and a lot of risk. We said that the more you of convective clearance you do, the higher chance there is that you will increase the blood viscosity, you will lose your circuit. And what else can you lose in such a situation? If you increase the blood viscosity with a very high filtration fraction, what else can you
Fistula
do?
access.
Yeah,
we can
you could lose your vascular access in the process. So what are the other prerequisites that you need to achieve in order to do hemodiafiltration? One is obviously you
The
need a
good
very good blood flow.
Yes, sir.
You need a very good blood flow. So you would, if
350
you
to
wanted to
400.
350 is too low, as we just
400.
calculated.
Yes,
If you
sir.
really want to
400
get
to 500.
you need 400 and above. So you need a very good vascular access which delivers that flow for you. You will need to use large bore needles, 15 gauge needles at least. What else are the prerequisites?
Sir, the high flux hemodialyzer with
Right.
hemodiafilter.
So you need either a hemofilter or a high flux dialyzer. Most important of all.
So, yes. Online, this
Ultra pure water.
ultra pure water.
Ultra pure water, which is defined how?
Sir, with 0.1 colony forming units and toxin should be less than 0.03.
Yeah. So if you have 0.1 colony forming units per ml, is this fluid good enough to infuse into a patient as replacement fluid?
No.
Sir, furthermore, it should be 0.01.
We need sterile water, sir, actually.
Sterile water. Yes, sir.
You don't need sterile water. You need sterile
quality water.
Hemodiafiltrate.
Filter.
So there is a difference between the water that you supply to your machine and the final fluid which is infused. Where is it infused?
IV.
IV, yeah, obviously. You're not going to give it intramuscular, but where in the circuit?
Pre-filter or post-filter?
Either pre or post-filter. So either
yes,
into the arterial or the venous bubble
venous
chamber.
line.
If you have set up the circuit, you will see that both options are available to you in the special circuit for the 5008. So if you use ultra pure water, which has around 0.1 colony forming units, and you say that's not good enough, then what is the level that you need for the hemodiafiltrate? So 0.1, I agree, ultra pure water is 0.1 colony forming units and less than 0.03 endotoxin units per ml. But that we said is not good enough. We need our fluid to be near sterile. So there is a guideline, or there is a cutoff even for the hemodiafiltrate which has been defined. Can anybody tell me what that is?
1 to 10 raised to minus 6.
0.001. 10 raised to minus
10 raised to minus 6 colony forming units per ml and less than 0.03 endotoxin as per AAMI and European Union. There is one between all the CIS. I think maybe the Japanese have brought the endotoxin level down to 0.01. You can look it up. But so if you are using water with 0.1 colony forming units and you want your infusate to have 10 raised to minus 6, which is 0.5 zeros and then 1, how does the machine do that?
Sir, machine is
The cold-
built to hemofilter.
Yes, sir.
Two dialysis installed.
Cold sterilization.
What is cold sterilization?
So there are two ultra filters in series.
Right, in series. And what is the what does the ultra filter do?
Sir, it reduces the bacterial count to 1 log.
1 log?
2 log reduction
2
is
log.
there.
2 log.
2 log.
Yes, sir.
So 2 log is 100 times reduction. So when, as Dr. Rashmi said, you connect them in series, then it becomes 100 into 100, that is 10,000. So it produces a 10,000 fold reduction. So if you start off with 0.1, which is 10 raised to minus 1, and then you produce a 10 raised to minus 5 further reduction, you are going to come down to that 10 raised to minus 6. But how do you know that your hemo filter is working adequately? How do you know your ultra filter has not sprung a hole and is passing large amounts of bacteria and endotoxin through it? Or will your patient will sue you, or he'll sue Fresenius?
They'll sue us.
So how do you know?
Sir, it is a manufacturer. It is a fixed amount of dialysis we can use for this filter. We cannot use more than.
Sorry?
The recommendations are that there is a fixed amount of.
No,
days
but
or time.
supposing before that fixed day, your machine, your diasafe filter has sprung a hole in it. How do you know?
Sir, that but sir, when there is a blood leak in a normal HT circuit, we have a strip test.
Yeah, but this is happening in the dialysate circuit, so your blood leak is not going to tell you anything. The diasafe is not in the blood circuit.
Blood, yes, sir.
It's in the dialysate circuit.
Dialysate circuit.
LOL test.
Which test? All of you use 4008 machines at least?
Yes, sir.
Have you seen
Yes,
the
sir.
self-test?
Sir?
Have you seen the self-test?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
What
sir.
is the last step of the self-test?
Diasafe, okay.
Diasafe, okay.
Diasafe plus test. So the Diasafe plus test is what is carried out. What is done in that stage is that the machine closes all the valves in the dialysate circuit and blows air. You've seen there is an air separation pump in the machine which removes air from the dialysate normally. So with all the valves closed, that air is blown across the diasafe and it is seen whether the diasafe can hold that pressure. If there is a leak in the diasafe, the pressure will drop rapidly. So during that time, you might have noticed when that test is going on, the dialysate flow, that LED light goes off. That there is no dialysate, the machine is blowing air at that point of time. And it checks whether the diasafe can hold the pressure. If the diasafe has a leak, the pressure will not build up pressure. The pressure will fall rapidly, in which case it will fail the test. The same test, which is called as the cyclic pressure holding test, is carried out every half an hour for a short period of 30 seconds while dialysis is going on. The machine goes into bypass and the test is carried out to test the integrity of the diasafe. And if the integrity of the diasafe is not maintained, then the machine will say, attention, stop hemodiafiltration. So that is the built-in safeguard which the manufacturer has given you in such a situation. But the responsibility of providing the water of the specified level still rests with the individual units. I'll stop here. Does anybody have any questions either for Dr. Rashmi or for me?
So, sir, excuse me, sir. So for hello.
Yeah.
So for hemodiafiltration, if the blood flow, if we can get the blood flow more than 400 ml per minute, then only we should recommend the patient to
Yes.
do for hemodiafiltration.
Yes. If you just saw what sort of a filtration
sir.
fraction you require, and in
Yes.
order to maintain your filtration fraction at less than 25%, and at the same time give the patient an adequate amount of convective clearance, then you need that blood flow. If you do less than that, then you are not going to achieve what the Catalonian study told us that we should be doing. So in that case, you might be wasting a lot of convective clearance, or using a lot of ultra pure water, a lot of sterile hemodiafiltrate, but not achieving the endpoint of mortality reduction. Your patient's outcome would be the same as if he were to have a normal hemodialysis, as happened in the contrast and the Turkish studies.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Sir, one doubt regarding the
Yeah.
case, sir. Like this patient, sir, we like don't know like whether diuretics were given initially or not. But
Yeah.
at this point of time, he's taking 5 drugs, which none of which is
Yeah.
diuretics. So when we tell it as diagnosis, will say as refractory hypertension or not, sir?
Yeah. So there were a few points which we could not discuss for lack of time. One was that this patient gets into intradialytic hypertension. Now, for a
Yes, sir.
long time, people believe that intradialytic hypertension was caused by the renin-angiotensin system. But it
Yes,
is
sir.
today believed that that is not true. There is an article in Hemodialysis International by Dr. Madhukar Mishra on intradialytic hypertension, which is again believed to be volume overloading. So the treatment of intradialytic hypertension is getting the dry weight down further. I would probably put this patient on not just alternate day dialysis, but perhaps some duration of daily dialysis and keep on bringing his dry weight down. Also remember that you may do daily diafiltration for about 1 week and bring his dry weight down, but you may not immediately see an improvement
sir.
in blood
Yes, sir.
pressure. There is a lag period.
Phenomena. Yes,
A
sir.
lag phenomenon. So it may be necessary to keep probing this patient's dry weight, to use other tools, which again we didn't discuss. What are the tools that are available for probing the dry weight? There is the clinical method, there is the IVC diameter, which our intensivists are so fond of. There is bioimpedance analysis, and now there is lung ultrasound. So there are many tools available, and even DEXA can be used in some situations. So there are many tools available to look at probe the dry weight, and some of those would be used. But this patient probably would benefit from that. He has anyway, he has high blood pressures. So hemodiafiltration, one of the advantages claimed for it is less hypotension. But this patient doesn't have hypotension; he has
No, sir.
intradialytic hypertension. So
Yes, sir.
perhaps in his case, the hemodiafiltration is being given for middle molecule clearance, but perhaps he would also benefit from some days of daily dialysis and reduction of his dry weight further.
Sorry.
Sir,
Dr. Abhishek,
question,
you
sir.
have, yeah.
So
tell
this,
me.
So this concept of filtration is that it comes only in CRRT and hemodiafiltration and not in hemodialysis.
Yeah,
which
good
we
question.
do normal.
Yeah, good question. So you look at what you do in your normal hemodialysis. You do say a 4-hour session with 2 kg of ultrafiltration. So 500 ml per hour, 82 ml per minute. Your blood flow, no, sorry, 500 ml per hour. So about 8 ml per minute, not 80. So Welcome to the webinar. You have entered as an attendee in listen only. Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yeah, no, there was a cut in something else. Yeah. So anyway, so you would be having about 8 ml per minute at a blood flow of 300 ml per minute. Your filtration fraction here is about 2%, 2 to 3%, which is absolutely minimal. So in normal cases, even if a patient were to gain 4 kilos of interdialytic weight gain, so you are taking off 4 kilos. So instead of you're taking off 1 kilo per 1 liter per hour, so around 20 ml or around 16 to 17 ml per minute. So 17 ml with a blood flow of 300, still your filtration fraction is only 6%. So you're very, very safe. But in CRRT, your blood flows are low. So when your blood flows are low, automatically your filtration fraction is increasing, because as somebody pointed out, your blood flow is in the denominator. So low blood flow, higher filtration fraction. Therefore, one of the methods to take care of that is increase your blood flow even in CRRT. But that of course brings additional consequences. You may not achieve a complete equilibration between the blood and the dialysate of the solute you're trying to clear. When you go for online hemodiafiltration intermittently, as in chronic kidney disease patients, what you're doing is very large volumes. If you look at CRRT, your volume per hour is about 2 liters per hour. Even if you are doing full hemofiltration for a 60 kilo adult, you would go at 1.5 to 2 liters per hour. So that translates down into about 25 to 30 ml per minute. So even if you kept your blood flow at 200, your filtration fraction falls down to 12%. But if your blood flow is around 100 ml per minute, then your filtration fraction is about 25%. Now, when you're doing hemodiafiltration for chronic kidney disease, as we saw, our amount of ultrafiltration is 80 to 90 ml per minute. So if you kept your blood flow in such a situation at 200, your filtration fraction is almost 40%. So you need to go up to about 400 ml per minute, and then your filtration fraction drops down to 22%.
Okay.
So the
Okay, sir.
filtration
And that
fraction,
UF includes the replacement fluid
Replacement
also.
fluid.
it's it is the replacement fluid which is significantly changing things. When you look at what is happening as in the calculation that we did, the replacement fluid is 80 ml per minute and the interdialytic
Yes.
weight gain ultrafiltration is 10 ml per minute. So that is negligible. 10 and 80. The big difference is the hemodiafiltration, the replacement fluid.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
So one more question. So
Yeah.
can we, is it recommended to use high flux filter even in 4008 Fresenius, or can we?
Right. So what did the hemo study say about high flux dialysis?
So there's no
Sir.
much difference, no difference in the.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think you got your answer. No difference in either the MPO study or the hemo
Or the
study
hemo study.
between low flux and high flux for routine hemodialysis. So if your aim is routine hemodialysis, you're not going to achieve much. If your aim is routine hemodialysis, but your patient has dialysis related amyloidosis with high beta 2 microglobulin and you want to achieve some more ultrafilter, some more middle molecule clearance, remember a high flux dialysis, again something that I can't go into in great detail, there is a certain amount of convective clearance because of what is known as internal filtration in a high flux dialyzer, and that can, it's really difficult to explain that concept without the help of slides or a blackboard, so I can't explain that, but that does happen. So if your aim is some amount of convective clearance due to internal filtration, then you could do that with, you could use a high flux dialyzer in that situation. There is no large study which shows that this will impact outcomes eventually. When you go to hemodiafiltration, a high flux dialysis becomes mandatory because you're aiming for convective clearance of a significant amount.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
If are there any more questions? If there are none, we will end the session. Thank you so much, sir. A lot of new information for.
Thank you. I hope.
Thank you.
I
Yes,
hope
sir.
it was useful. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Sir,
sir.
I was wondering if we can get a class from you, like we can do a webinar kind of thing on such a meeting only, where you can share slide using your and explain a bit of basics about this filtration fraction, because we at our center do not use the 5008 and we are
Right.
not very used to.
Okay, we'll look at doing it somewhere. Maybe you'll have to give me a couple of weeks to prepare.
No, sir. No
Yeah.
problem. No problem. Whenever it's
Yeah,
suitable.
we
for
can
you.
do that with slides.
Okay, sir. Thank you everyone for joining. Thanks, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Especially thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Rashmi.
Thank you, sir.
Welcome. Okay.
We'll end the meeting,
Yeah.
and we'll anything else we'll discuss in the chat. Thank you. Sir.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.